Welcome to A Slice of Therapy. This podcast was created with Anchor. And if you've not heard of Anchor, let me explain. It's free. It's a really easy way to make a podcast. And it helps me because I can just do this every day directly into my phone, because there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So if you fancy making a podcast too, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. In this episode, I just want to talk a little bit about therapy itself and a frame of reference that I always use as a therapist, which can be probably best described as the two experts model, which might seem a strange thing because when you go and see a therapist, you might well think that, what happens is you hand yourself over to this expert, in inverted commas, and they'll have all the answers and so on. And the issue with that I have around the one expert model is that you've got two people in a room and both have a certain amount of expertise. Sometimes that expertise will be around sort of psychological frameworks and ways of seeing things and the kind of ideas that the therapists themselves have been trained in, the kind of questions that they can ask. And there's also, of course, the person who goes to see the therapist. Now, the person who goes to see the therapist is also an expert. First of all, is an expert on a whole host of things that perhaps on the face of it don't seem to have a lot to do with therapy. But I'll come back to that in a moment. But secondly, they're an expert on the actual topic that is being discussed, which is the person themselves. So if you go and seek out therapy or counselling support, your expertise is in you. You're far more of an expert in you than the therapist is. The therapist, of course, has a lot of training and ideas and approaches that they can help and that can bring some insights into the room. But the biggest expert in the room about you, well, is you. And so I always think it's a good idea to hold that power yourself in the therapy room. So that if a therapist says something that doesn't land with you, that doesn't resonate, that doesn't feel true to you, you be the expert on that. You can knock those ideas down. It's not really a good idea to simply agree with your therapist, simply because all the therapist can do is apply some frames of reference and ask some useful questions. But what they can't do is know whether those ideas actually resonate with you, whether they ring true. And there can be a danger sometimes where the person who goes to get therapy can sometimes feel as though the polite thing to do is to simply agree with the therapist. When in actual fact, the two experts approach is much more valuable because you can actually bring that into the room in such a way as the two people, the therapist and the client, can co-create something that is much bigger than if it was just one person throwing out ideas, especially when that person isn't an expert on you specifically, but is maybe an expert in something else, something adjacent, something that might be helpful, sure, but not an expert in you specifically. That's what you bring. And so what a waste it would be if a therapist who's only just met you, or has maybe I'd say 5 or 6 sessions with you or whatever, takes away that expertise from you. That would be a real waste, wouldn't it, of the knowledge in the room. And so I like the two experts model because the way I think of it is that my biggest advantage is that I'm not you. My biggest advantage as the therapist is that I can kind of Be the person who is outside of you that asks you the useful questions that you might not have asked yourself, or maybe even suggests certain things in those questions as I try to understand you. And in those questions, deliver certain insights that actually do resonate. And so my value, my biggest advantage is that I'm not you. But your biggest advantage is that you are you. And so by having the two of us in the room at once, we actually fill in each other's blind spots, I suppose. Because you being you and seeing everything from your perspective only, it's very difficult to ask yourself good questions. It's not impossible, but it's just easier when someone else is acting as a sounding board for you. And of course, as well, we often can't see the forest for the trees when we're actually in it ourselves. And so having that outside eye is really useful. And so that kind of will fill in our blind spot as the client. But the therapist's blind spot is the fact that they're not actually in your mind as you are. The therapist is always on the outside, trying to ask questions to learn more about this stuff, but the person who already knows that is you. And so when you go with the two expert model, when I as the therapist assume your expertise in the very topic that we're actually here to talk about, which is you, then it sorts out my blind spot. And the very fact that you're in the room with me and is getting that outside eye sorts out yours. If either of us denied that expertise in the other, denied that advantage that we have, then it would be a much poorer exchange. And so this episode really is to encourage you to take your power in the therapy room. You are the expert in you. And if a therapist should say something that just clearly isn't landing, then you don't have to agree with the therapist. In fact, it's more helpful if you say, actually, that's way off. You're barking up the wrong tree there, I'd say. And so I think it's important to state this sometimes, to emphasize that this is actually a collaboration, that this is a co-creation. And the two of us bring something into the room that is really invaluable, something that we don't have alone. And from my point of view as the therapist, the thing that I don't have alone is that access to your innermost thoughts, that access to your experiences, your history, that access to your emotions, your bodily sensations. All I can really do there is ask you about them to try and gain an understanding, but you are the expert in that. And I just think it's important sometimes to restate that this is a co-creation, it's a collaboration, it's an equal partnership, and the two of us are working together, and each of us is helping to overcome the other's blind spots. And that's why it's so powerful, really, because together we can provide a much wider view than we can do alone. And certainly from the therapist's point of view, the therapist really needs your expertise and your insights too, in terms of helping to generate the ideas that will lead to change. And so both of us, you and I, bring different kinds of expertise into the room, which when combined together can create something really, really powerful. But that can only happen if you're empowered in your position as the expert in you. So if you like this idea and you find it helpful, then please spread it around. Click share, send it on to others. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, it's completely free. If you want to watch them on video, if you prefer that, you can find them all at asliceoftherapy.com. And if you'd like to work with me one-to-one, I'm Alun Parry, and you'll find out more about me and what I do at Liverpool's Psychotherapy.co.uk. So thanks for listening. I'll be back again with another one tomorrow.